Today, you all came here for Devworld in general, of course, but today we're going to talk about developing AI in a privacy-conscious world. So before we talk about that, a quick show of hands. Who here has already deployed AI? All right, there's quite a lot of people. And who here is using AI on a regular basis? Awesome, much more as well. So that's awesome, cool. So to start off, this is me. My name is Sleebe. I am a senior solutions architect at Zoom. I've been there for over 4.5 years now, coming up to 5 years, and it's been a heck of a ride, as you can imagine. I talk daily to customers and internal people to really talk about safety, security, and AI in general, and how can we make sure that we protect people's data, both from a Zoom perspective as well as from a compliance, regulatory perspective with our customers. There we go. As generative AI is becoming more and more a staple of society, you have image generators like DALL-E, Midjourney, and many others scraping data that is readily available on the internet. And people have become more and more skeptical and more kind of scared to put their data simply on the internet. And what you're really seeing is they're afraid of getting their data trained and used or misused by these LLMs or anything else. Whether that's personal data, something that they've created, they don't want their data simply to be used. And we're even seeing that in, for example, Midjourney. They trained on data from famous artists like Damien Hirst, David Hockney, and even ChatGPT, apparently, allegedly being trained on books from George R.R. Martin. And because of that fear, you're seeing a lot of researchers and people, well, first of all, putting less content on the internet, but even creating specific solutions to poison data. So this is, as an example, this is something that they call Nightshade, where they have very specific data sets that they, for example, label differently. So instead of saying this picture of a cat is an actual cat, they actually have a picture of a cat and it will say cow in the label. And they also have some other more in-depth things that they do from their side. So what you could see as an example, if we look at the dog on the far left side, if we have a clean model, we simply get a picture of a dog if we ask for a dog. However, if we're poisoning that data from 50 poison samples, 100 poison samples, we keep poisoning it, we can even get a picture of a cat even though we're asking for a dog. And the same can happen, for example, with a handbag. I want a handbag, but I get a toaster. And that's the kind of fear that people have, making sure that whatever they're creating is not being used to then form into getting their kind of art style taken by other people. But it's not all bad news, of course. Many of you will know, AI can amplify people's work. It can not necessarily replace, but really boost people's efficiency. And there's even artists who are doing the same. So this is an example of Refik Anadol, and he is using AI and machine learning to basically create beautiful pieces of art that are moving. So he's using something called a generative adversarial network. And basically what he's doing is he's using data from digital data sets and publicly available resources and processed them through a bunch of machine learning classification models. And the cool thing is you can even see this in Kunsthal Rotterdam today, if you want. So if after this event you're still in the Netherlands, make sure you go there as well. So how can we kind of give this kind of power and this kind of liberation to the people to not be afraid of AI and to embrace the power that the AI can bring you? So what we really need to talk about today is building that trust. And that's something that we'll talk about today. And this will go to the next slide. There we go. So first, why does it really matter? So we have kind of 4 things we really have to think about. First of all, ethics and morality. We don't want to become the next Lex Luthor and steal everyone's data and become like the next supervillain, right? But also, we just want to make sure that we protect people's data in general. Legality matters. So obviously, we are operating in a legal space where we have to do specific things to comply with, for example, GDPR or the California Consumer Protection Act, the EU AI Act is coming up, the UK AI Act, and many more that are coming up that are happening in the fields that we work in. You also don't want your brand to suffer either, right? You want to make sure that whatever you're doing, no one's looking at it like, oh, I'm not sure. Like, for example, people have this preconception of Facebook stealing your data. Well, that's not necessarily true today, but it's still a brand image that's happening today. And finally, the more people trust your product, the more people trust your AI model, the more people will actually use your product, and more user adoption is always great for everyone, right? So very quickly, what do we do from Zoom's perspective? So we have 3 pillars. We are federated, responsible, and empowering. So I'm not going to go very into depth about what we do specifically, because this is not a sales pitch or anything. But I'll cover this very quickly. So federated. So at Zoom, we don't just use our own LLMs to create our AI features, which means we, for example, use OpenAI, we use Anthropic, and some other models that can help us enhance these experiences. And that's for 2 reasons. One, it's quality. More LLMs, better experience, you can dynamically change. And second is cost. The more you federate, the less graphics cards you have to deploy yourself. And of course, the cost for operation and the entry level will go down significantly. Responsible AI will cover very broadly in this deck as well. But just keep in mind that we don't train any of our AI features using any of the customer content. And lastly, empowering. This is something that I quickly talked about and quickly kind of touched on. But really what you have to think about is what I'm building something that's really going to empower people to really be the better versions of themselves. And just in general, we take AI security very seriously. And I do a lot of work on that as well with a bunch of my colleagues. And in fact, we've even seen that Zoom has taken some very tough calls in the interest of keeping up that commitment. And it's something that you should strive for as well. So in your product, don't just think of security as a little checkbox, but keep that throughout the whole presentation, or the whole, sorry, this is doing funny stuff, that's why I'm like, keep that up through the entire product management process. So to help you, very quickly, we grouped up the pillars that we'll discuss today. So very high level AI challenges, we're going to talk about AI bias, misuse. We're going to talk about mistakes that can happen with AI, right? AI is not perfect. We're going to talk about potential data leaks. Then we're going to quickly talk about building trust. So how do you build trust? Well, that can be through documentation, transparency, and making sure that users know what they're actually doing. We're going to talk about responsible AI, like I said before, so no training, making sure that you have security and privacy at its core. And finally, how do we keep it human? So our approach to security is very simple. This is basically ISO 27001, which means that from ideation to design to coding, there's a security checks every single step of the way. There's a security owner within the product every single step of the way. And that's from, like I said, ideation, coding, design, but even during deployment, making sure that we do pen testing. We make sure that we stay certified as well. We do all of these questionnaires with, SIGFUL, SOC2, etc. This is also very cool. If you haven't seen it before, there's the OWASP top 10, what's it called again? The OWASP top 10 for LLM specifically. So it's basically the security stuff that you can do, train, or basically practice and test your environment on security. So for example, prompt injection. You'll probably have seen this multiple times, that you can even trick ChatGPT into answering a CAPTCHA, which is weird, but you can still do it somehow. We have offensive security, so obviously we do vulnerability researches, independent pen testing, red team exercises and everything, not just related to AI, but the entire platform. This slide is probably a little bit less exciting for the devs here, but very quickly I wanted to cover the upcoming and current legislation. So very quickly, EU AI Act, that's almost finalized. They're building the legislation itself is basically complete, and it should be operational by Q2, Q3 of 2026. So you need to make sure that you're already compliant by that time, right? And it might take some work, but really it's just a legal framework with very clear requirements around how you should develop AI and how it should work in general. At the same time, they're also working on the AILD, which is just basically who is liable for any kind of damages AI can do. So for example, if the AI somehow is impacting a business, who is liable for that? We also have the Data Privacy Framework program, which is a great program just to allow for more data transfer between the EU and the US, which allows us also to be more federated across the globe. But we have to keep in mind Schrems 3 might come up. So think about that as data sovereignty and residency and governance continues to be quite important. The UK is also working on an AI Systems Act. It's going to be very similar to the EU AI Act, but the cool thing about it is that they're really embracing the industry to build this Systems Act, which is quite unique, I would say, because the EU AI Act is mostly, just legislative people working on this act. Finally, the US SEC is finalizing the rules as well, so that should be coming up very soon this year. And the California Act, the California Consumer Protection Act, is also going to be finalized with rules around AI later this year. Now, one thing you'll see in the end is a global AI legislation tracker. We're not, by any means probably, there's no lawyers here, I'm assuming. If you are, raise your hand, but I don't think so. But this tracker will give you a quick insight of what legislation there is around the world, what kind of things do I have to think about if I operate in specific countries. So definitely check it out, and of course, as always, check with your legal department before doing anything external as well. So responsible AI. This is a term that I think everyone's heard at least once on LinkedIn, conferences, wherever, and we don't really have an industry standard definition of it yet. So the question will be, what does it really mean for you? And you can follow, Google's responsible AI framework, Microsoft's, and there are many more out there as well. But just think about what does it mean for me? And overall, it comes down to several things. So assessing the risks, right? Is it going to harm someone? What are you going to do to avoid it from harming people? Fairness, AI systems should treat people all fairly, so no bias and those kind of things. Reliability and safety, privacy and security, inclusiveness, and transparency, right? Those are just some things that we have to think about when we talk about responsible AI. So how does that work at Zoom? So at Zoom, we have 5 key pillars. And that's the quality of the training data, so making sure that we get the best training data there is to actually train our models if we need to. Security and privacy at our core. So that's basically what I keep mentioning, right? It's not just a check mark, it's also a culture for everyone has to be involved with this. Transparency to users through UI. So if you have an AI feature, does a user understand what is happening when they're using this specific feature? And finally, don't train using customer content. That might be good for very specific niche situations, but like I said before, any kind of regular user, when they hear that kind of phrasing, they'll not want to use your feature. So being transparent through documentation, ease of use, is going to be very important. So what are some of the challenges? So here's just 4 of them. AI bias is going to be a big one, of course. So it could be biased because of 3 different categories. So you'll see, obviously, algorithmic bias. So something in the algorithm could already be biased towards a specific outcome or specific results. Training data bias. So this is what I was mentioning before. Make sure that you actually have diverse data, not only based on ethnicity, whatever it is, but just in general, more training data is usually better. We also have cognitive bias, and that's kind of the predetermined bias that we as a culture might already have. And that could be part of that training data, some form of bias that is somehow already built into a lot of things that we think, and that could actually affect it as well. So data leaks, this is something that I mentioned before. Training your LLM with third-party data, you need to make sure where you actually get that data from, because some of it might be poisoned, some of it might just not be great training data in general, right? And finally, sanitation and containerization. So when you look at these specific LLMs, when people are doing their prompts and getting their responses, you want to make sure that there's no kind of crosstalk between if I ask something that I get the results from another company or another user. Then we also have misuse. So can your product be misused in some form? Is that deepfake, scams, whatever? And do you have ways to prevent that as well? And finally, mistakes. Obviously, you need to be able to tell customers, AI, especially now, it's still not in its infancy, but it's never going to be perfect. So how do you tell people, hey, just so you're aware, whatever it's coming out of here, it's probably going to be quite useful, but there could be mistakes in general. And what kind of mistakes can you make? So we have some examples here. One of my favorite examples is there was a football match, and they used the camera to track the ball automatically. However, the referee was bald like me, and it was tracking the referee's head, which doesn't, it's not a great real viewing experience, right? There was another one with, for example, driverless car. So there was a car, no driver, people were sitting in the back. Police were saying, hey, please stop. The car stops. The police get to the actual car, and the car drives off. It's like, things like that is not really what you want to happen, but it can happen. And those are things that you have to keep in mind when building your solution. So building trust, this comes back to transparency and documentation. So we need to make sure that you're transparent. The way we do it through our tools is we give prompts saying, hey, whenever you're using this feature, this is the type of data we're using. Please give an okay that we're actually doing this. And finally, one of the more important parts, would you give this to your kids? Would you allow your kids to actually use this kind of feature? Now, this might not apply to all AI, right? Because, for example, computer vision, well, they're not using it per se. But would you give this kind of product to your kids without them really doing any kind of big harm? So to quickly wrap it up, so when you develop, there's 4 kind of key things to think about. Privacy obviously is going to be important. We want to be responsible with how we develop and how we actually use these things. We need to understand the risk, but more importantly, amplify people's experiences through AI. With that said, I would like to thank you. I'm going to hang out here, so if you have any questions, feel free to come up to me. We also have a workshop that's going to start at 1:30, all the way in the back at the workshop to show you kind of what we can do with our Zoom Video SDK. All right, thank you so much.